Hi, Allyssa. Welcome to the Integrative Health Coach Success Podcast.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, we're excited for you to kind of be our guest expert for the day. And I'm looking forward to diving into the specific topic that we're going to chat about, because it's not something we've gone much in depth with other guests before, but I think it's such an important issue that's kind of brought to light. So what I would love to do to start is, could you share with our listeners what you're currently doing? So you're an IHP, you're running your own business. Kind of share with our listeners a little bit of what you're currently doing in the health and wellness space.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you like to hear a little bit of an overview of what I'm doing more with my clients, or how, when it comes to, I know a lot of people listening to this, of course, are practitioners, so more practice-based?
Yeah, let's do a little bit of both. Let's start with kind of your clientele, what you're kind of currently doing there. And then you can share as much of kind of the business practice stuff as you'd like.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with clients fully virtually. It was even before COVID happened. I was completely telehealth. It's what I found worked best, kept the cost low for, my clients. They really appreciate it. And as far as compliancy goes, so we've been doing that since 2016. I've been fully virtual and it's been wonderful. I primarily work with clients that are dealing with lingering chronic health issues. And I was really drawn to help that type of individual because that was me, battling back and forth for 10 years with some of my own health issues. I work with a lot of clients dealing with chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, or, HPA axis maladaptation, brain fog, gut issues. And we'll be talking about some of the other more specific niches that I go to here in the future with breast implant illness for sure. But that's primarily what I deal with for the client spectrum. But I work with any client ultimately that is looking to, of course, get to the root cause as far as why they're having their issues, and being able to address that at more of a cellular level. As far as the business side of things, I primarily find my clients through Instagram. So that has been our biggest platform over the last 2 years specifically, and where we've been meeting most of the people that need our help.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. And social media kind of takes these ebbs and flows, I think, in our industry, of where it's like, it's a blessing, it's a curse. It's a, it can take up so much time. It can, can make you compare yourself, but ultimately It's a great way to just kind of reach people that need us. It's a wonderful platform for that. So yeah, that's great. All right. So let's back it up a little bit. When you kind of first started getting interested in health and wellness, is it something that you've always had the love for? Was it something that you were doing before, you started the biohacking bombshell? Kind of give us a little bit of a preview as to what was happening before.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, since I was I'd say a child, honestly, I knew I wanted to be in health and wellness. My dad got diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was 8. And so just witnessing him going through all of that, and also seeing how him changing so many of the factors in his lifestyle really made a huge difference in his healing. Besides just, he did do the typical chemotherapy, radiation, but if he wouldn't have supported his body with these other holistic or integrative measures, I don't think that he would still be with us today, to be completely honest. So that was my first exposure to how important it was to really be addressing all those other variables in your health. But I already had planned on going to college for exercise and sports science. I thought I was going to go more into the athletic training side of things. And then, of course, in the middle of my undergrad, I thought physical therapy was the route I wanted to go. And then I realized that that really wasn't where my heart was. While I was in college, I got diagnosed with Lyme disease. It was also when I got my breast implants and started experiencing a bunch of issues, was dealing with chronic fatigue and brain fog and a ton of gut issues as well. And so because I was so underserved by the typical conventional medicine, Western medicine side of things, and I had to go do my own research, my own studying, which is what a lot of us, that's how we ended up in this realm, is because we needed to be our own solution. That was how I ended up going down the route of becoming an integrative health practitioner and serving people the way that I do now. So I knew I always wanted to do it. It was just really in what realm I wanted to be in.
Yeah. Because there's all different forms of like what health and wellness, can mean. People that have listened to this podcast for a while, they probably know, but I, was a personal trainer at first, and I helping people. And then I realized, this can only get them so far. Yes, exercise is important, but also, so then I went back to school for nutrition. And then, I found other certification programs and ultimately, obviously, IHP. But it basically just builds, right? You have that like innate passion for helping and knowing that health and wellness is important. And as you continue to kind of build your knowledge, it kind of flourishes in other ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what we can chat about next, which you kind of hinted at, which I would love for kind of you to talk about, either your experience, if you're willing, or kind of, let's start there if you're up for it, which I think you are, as far as your experience with the breast implant illness. And now we know that this can be just like one item in the rain barrel, right? For lots of women. But I have had lots of clients who, it's the last item in the rain barrel that causes everything to overflow. And it can be significant, or maybe it's, the third item in the rain barrel, and the other two things that come after wouldn't have overflown if the breast implants weren't there. So share with us a little bit about kind of your knowledge or experience around the whole topic of breast implant illness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always I've done an extensive amount of videos within my YouTube and my Instagram about my entire story. So any question is, nothing's off the table. I'm very open about this. I just think it's so important. And a lot of women are afraid to even acknowledge this is a thing. And especially because there's been so much gaslighting in the medical community, acting like this cannot happen and it's not a big deal. And it's just now starting to come to light because people are also being willing to be super vulnerable and talk about this. But I want to make it very clear that breast implant illness is definitely a label for a constellation of symptoms. And you said it beautifully, where it can just be one drop in the bucket, one, variable that is in that rain barrel that's causing it to overflow. So I had gut issues my entire life, as far back as I can remember. Guarantee I had parasites. From the time I was like 5 years old, I can remember doing my first stool test. And then I had IBS issues my entire life. And so when I'm looking at that, and then I look at all the issues that followed. And when I was 20 in college, I was in my sophomore year of college, I got breast implants. I see that so many of my issues, it was just this domino effect afterwards. Some things were present beforehand. I did have gut issues beforehand, but the fatigue, the greater thyroid issues, the greater skin issues, the brain fog. I mean, the fatigue was probably my biggest thing, but even the Lyme diagnosis that came not even 6 months afterwards, I've seen that as a pattern where you can go in YouTube, and there have been other plastic surgeons and doctors that have spoken to this, and they're trying to figure out, why is it that we are seeing such a high relevance or an increase in Lyme diagnoses for females that have breast implants. And so I truly believe that, anyone can really have the Lyme bacteria. The same with EBV and, herpes viruses and all those other things. And then you end up having these other stressors like the breast implants, and then all bets are off. So I wasn't diagnosed with Lyme or even seeing a lot of the symptoms that tend to be indicative of Lyme until after I had the implants. And I don't view that as a coincidence. So can we sit here and say, oh, all these issues are directly because of the breast implants? Not necessarily, unless you're looking at the specific type of lymphoma that they have directly correlated to the certain type of breast implant. But I think that just because you can't prove direct correlation or direct causation doesn't mean you can't see that there clearly is a correlation there. So I ended up dealing with all these issues from the time that I was 20 until I removed them in 2019. So 3 years ago. And I had them for, what was that? I guess it was about 8 years that I ended up having them. Were all of my symptoms resolved? No, for sure not. And I did a lot of work with everything that I learned in IHP beforehand. I also did a lot afterwards. And I think it's very important for anyone listening to this, whether it's a practitioner telling their client or whether it is a client just listening in, that I don't expect someone's symptoms to completely be resolved if they choose to explant. There's so much work that we really need to do prior and afterwards. Have I seen some women say, oh my God, yeah, I feel like I removed them and a week later I want to run a marathon? Yes, but I find it to be like maybe 1%. So I think proper expectations are super important when it comes to this type of illness, and knowing that it's one drop in the bucket. You very likely had a lot of other things going on prior to, and this just tipped you over. Maybe not. But most of the clients I see in my clinic dealing with that, that's the case.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I've experienced too is it's one of those things where, I would say 15% of women who have them, like they can work the protocols and they get better and they feel great. But when they're there and it's kind of like we're just banging our head against the wall and, the fatigue's not resolving, we've addressed the gut, we've, done heavy metals, we've, worked on detoxification pathways. It can be almost like that thing that makes it really, really hard for your body to heal in a way that we know it's capable of. And like you said, is it this magic bullet that you take them out and like everything resolves? No, but you give your body, I mean, literally no pun intended, a fighting chance to at least get rid of and rebalance in a way that it wouldn't have been able to, with the stress of two foreign objects in the body.
Yeah. For me, I had done so much work beforehand and I got to the point where I said, even if this is not the sole solution that is left, I need to, for my peace of mind, check this off the list. I went into it having zero expectations of feeling better, quote unquote, afterwards, but I knew that this was adding to toxicity. So when I have clients that'll say to me, how do I know if this is going to make me feel better? Is this going to make a significant difference? I said, you have to go into this just having the expectation that it's not going to be your sole solution, and also going into it fully knowing that either way, these are foreign objects. You can look at the list of all the ingredients that is in breast implants, and are you okay with having that in your body? And knowing that down the road, either way, you're supposed to be getting them, quote unquote, replaced anyway. And so there are other alternatives to breast implants. You have fat transfer that is out there. There are people that will there's a bunch of different techniques that they've used for women that are getting double mastectomies and are too high of a risk to go ahead and get implants as well. So there are other options. It's not as commonly talked about anymore, but I think it will be as this is starting to become a more popular topic. People are going to want to look for alternatives. So I think that's also important because it's a very emotional decision, whether you're choosing to get them in or choosing to remove them, because you get so used to having them there, it becomes part of your identity for most of us. For me, it was very, very difficult. It took me a while to decide, but I'm glad that I did it. And I knew that checking that off my list would at least take a root cause away, that I knew if I was working on all these other things, I wasn't constantly fighting an uphill battle of toxicity with these two toxic devices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you were talking, I was thinking to myself, it must be an extremely emotional process, no matter what you decide, whether it's to leave them in, whether it's to take them out, whether it's to put them in the first place, because anything that has to do, especially with women, our bodies is typically, some sort of connection to an emotion, to an identity, to some sort of, emotion is probably the best word to describe it. And if we're moving in one direction or the other, it can change kind of how we're feeling and all of that. And so you said one thing that I kind of think is so important to highlight, because it's the truth with anything that we do with protocols, right? Or anything, is that like the expectation of everybody's looking for like that magic bullet. Like, can you just give me this and I'll get better? Can we just take these out and I'll get better? And oftentimes it's just this slow and steady process of taking out the toxicities one after another and replacing the deficiencies one after another. And eventually everything is balanced out, right? And most people think it's this kind of like linear, you start here and you end up there in, 30 days and everything's better. And most oftentimes, when you start to detox and peel back layers, you find more things. Or I can't tell you how many times I've had clients do gut-based protocols, and then we run a stool test and we find that they have parasites. And, it was because we shook things up enough, right? So when you kind of like get in there, there's other things that come to light. Mm-hmm. And it's so important to have expectations that don't set yourself or the practitioner up to kind of be in this, one lane, narrow-minded, progress mindset, because it really just, I always say, like, you need to be ready to pivot at a moment's notice, because that's important. And sending, or suggesting, X plans to a client, they could, take it as, all right, this is my solution and I just have to do this and I'll be better. And I think it's so good that you highlight that that's not always, like the miracle cure.
Yeah. I mean, it really can be carried over to the same thing, like someone removing an amalgam silver filling, someone getting out of a moldy home. I mean, either way, removing an IUD, stopping birth control. All of these things, we have to prep the body beforehand, and we absolutely have to be open to the fact that we're going to have work to do afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And no different than, you can live in a moldy home for 6 months before you start noticing any symptoms. Like you can have
Yes.
breast implants for 2 years before you start noticing that maybe they activated a Lyme infection
Yeah.
and so it takes time for, imbalances to manifest. It takes time for us to undo the same imbalances.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up because I actually had been speaking to Botox a couple of months ago. And I literally just did an interview with someone earlier today about that. And you can have women getting Botox done and men. I'm not going to count out men. I just primarily will talk to women. Botox and fillers. And it's not until they go and get their one Botox injection by the same injector 10 years later, and all of a sudden they have this cascade of issues. And I think that's hard for people to conceptualize because they think it can't be that. I've been doing this, or I've had these devices, or I've been taking birth control or whatever for how many years. It can't be that, or I'm living in this house. And it can happen down the road. So I love that you phrase that way, because so many times we think it cannot be that thing. And it indeed is that. But we just can't we have to remember the toxic load bucket, and you just hit your overflow.
Yep. Yeah. And everybody hits it at a different point. And there isn't always this like, this has happened and then this is my symptom. Like it's usually never that perfectly correlated.
Yes.
Which is why, I think we all would kind of call ourselves like little investigators. It's just all about investigating what's the biggest root cause, getting that to move first, and then you kind of just keep working at it to get somebody rebalanced. Yeah. I'd be curious, what do you find, and maybe it is kind of the emotional part, which maybe you can, elaborate on, what do you find to be the biggest kind of roadblock in, to either talking to, do you have clients who, I know you speak about it. So my guess is a lot of clients that come to you with the intention of at least exploring how their implants could be contributing to their health, right? So maybe you don't have clients that you need to like talk to about it that are hesitant, but
I do. I have both.
Okay. Yeah. Because I'm sure there's some people, I think it's like part of human nature. If we have this thought in the back of our mind, like this could be causing a problem, I want to explore it, but like, maybe I'm not ready to, jump in head first just yet. Let me see what she has to say, type of a thing. So yeah, what's kind of the, I would say, like overview of spectrum for what people are kind of ready for?
Yeah.
What's your biggest hurdle?
So some people will literally find me, and they may not have seen me talk about anything BII or breast implant illness at all. I have highlights on it on my social media. I've done playlists on YouTube, but some people, they totally miss it, and that's okay. And maybe they'll come to me and I have in my intake form, do you have breast implants? Do you have any other type of implants? Do you have Botox? Do you do fillers? Any type of injections? And then we'll bring it up then. So some people have no idea I want to talk about it. Others may get to the point where they know I'm going to bring it up, but emotionally they're not quite ready for it. And I tell them, I said, listen, I'm not judging you. I had them. And you have to get to a point where you feel comfortable even talking about this as an option. So sometimes we just bring it up and we say, listen, Sally, let's go and address drainage, parasites, mold, metals, viral load, radioactive elements. Let's address all these other things. And then if we feel like things haven't cleared up, we can revisit this topic. How do you feel about that? And I always let them know, though, we can do all this other work. It's very possible that you're only able to get so far when you do have breast implants, or when you are still taking birth control, or when you do still have amalgam fillings, right? I make sure that they realize this isn't the only permanent, quote unquote, source of a toxicity that I talk to people about, but breast implants are definitely one of them. And then I have some clients that will come to me and say, I know that this is an issue. I have an explant scheduled, or I'm really thinking about it. Let's talk about it more. It can definitely be a financial situation for someone because it costs just as much, if not more, to get them out as it is to get them in. So some people may not be able to do that. And sometimes it's having the conversation of saying, what can we do now? What is the greatest way I can help you to balance, to work on those deficiencies, to address all these other factors, control inflammation until you get to the point where you're either A, emotionally ready, or B, financially ready to be able to go and take that step.
Yeah. And sometimes, physically too, if they're deficient or going into a surgery, building them up in a more balanced way can be super helpful. Yeah. How do you feel about, because I've heard lots of kind of conflicting information about having a doctor who primarily focuses on explantation only, doing surgeries versus, doctors that do both. Do you have an opinion either way? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So my opinion right now is it's so important for the client, the patient, to go and educate themselves further. There are Facebook groups that address this. There are websites. I think breastimplantilliness.com is one of them that I really use. It has a lot of different resources, even a directory of different explant specialists. There are so many different resources that are on there that I think would just be helpful for someone to just say, I'm going to dive incredibly deep on this topic. And most women do. No matter what, they are trying to figure out if this is even a road they want to go down. But then you start to realize, okay, it is important to be able to figure out that I'm going to someone that is respecting my wishes when it comes to explant. So for my personal journey, I went back to my initial surgeon because I really liked him. And he always has very much respected my thoughts and my feedback on things. My mom had used him as well. And so I just very much got along with him. And I contacted him first instead of going to one of these specialists. And I went back to him and I said, you did my surgery first. You know my body, you know the thickness of my tissue, you know all the things. Are you open to doing an M block removal, which would be totally removing the implant with the capsule fully intact around it, which is what most people will recommend in the breast implant illness world, without interrupting the tissue or leaving the capsule in there? Or are you willing to do like a total capsulectomy, which is you remove all the capsule, but it doesn't necessarily have to be intact when you're removing the implant. You can remove the implant first, and then you can remove all the tissue that was surrounding it, the capsule afterwards, which is really important because some surgeons will say, you just need to remove the implant. You don't need to remove all the tissue. It's not that big of a deal, but there's a lot of toxicity that can be within that capsule and that tissue surrounding it. So that is important to remove. There have been women that just remove the implant and then have to go back in and remove the capsule because that is a source of toxicity. For me personally, and this was just what I felt comfortable with, he had said, I'm fine with doing a total capsulectomy. I will do an M block removal if I can, but if it's attached to the rib cage anywhere, which many times it is, if I deem to be it a greater risk, if I think it's going to be too traumatic to the body to totally remove all of that tissue instead of majority of it, I feel most comfortable leaving it there if I absolutely feel that it's necessary. But I'm telling you, I will do as much as possible. And I personally felt okay with that. I also went to him and said, I want you to take a picture. And you can see this when you go to different websites and whatnot about breast implant illness. I want you to take a picture of my implants. I want you to take a picture of the capsules so that I can see it. I want you to, and I sent him pictures of other women that have showed their pictures. Here's the exact type of picture that I want. I want you to show that you removed everything on the inside. And he did that for me. So I do also think it's possible to be able to go to a surgeon that you may feel comfortable with, whether it's your previous surgeon or whether it's another one in your area, because maybe it's just way too expensive for you to travel someplace to someone else that's on their list of qualified, surgeons, and say, this is what I want. Do you agree with that? Are you willing to even honor that breast implant illness is a thing? If they're not willing to honor that, personally for me, I wouldn't feel comfortable with it. My surgeon had said, listen, I don't think that there's only just starting to be some initial research that's out there about this, but a bunch of my fellow surgeons have talked about this topic for a while now. And if you have Facebook groups of hundreds of thousands of women that are all talking about this, there's no way that you can deny that there's some type of correlation. And so he was willing to acknowledge it. He still puts implants in. It's not like he's to the point where there are some surgeons that are like, I've learned so much about this that I will only do explant. Mm-hmm. He wasn't there, but he respected my decision. And that's what I felt comfortable doing. I would tell someone that they should do either an M block removal or at least a total capsulectomy. Recommend that you get pictures taken, see a surgeon that absolutely does acknowledge that this is a thing. And there are plenty of directories that are shared on all different types of resourceful pages to be able to guide you in the direction if you don't even know where to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes to say, that working with anybody who just simply respects your wishes as the client, yes. Like whether it's a health practitioner or a regular doctor, right? Having somebody that kind of will stand in your corner and appreciate your point of view on things is so important. Yeah. If someone's listening, because I know at first, I actually thought when I first started learning about it, that the capsule was something that they implanted to like hold the implant.
Okay.
And then this was years ago. And then I realized that's not what a capsule is. And so if people are listening, the capsule is basically the protective tissue. I'll let you explain it, but it's the protective tissue that forms around the implant, right?
Absolutely. It's a foreign object. And this happens around other types of implants in the body as well, right? It's that protective tissue because your body says this is foreign. Let's go and build up a wall around it. And sometimes you have women that have ruptured implants, and that capsule is like one of the only things that's holding in the silicone that's leaked out. It's crazy. So that's also another big reason where if your implant is ruptured, like taking that out en bloc where that at that point, protective layer is encapsulating that ruptured implant. That's when it's even more important. For me, I had saline. I also knew it wasn't ruptured, but if someone knows that, I think en bloc is even more important then, because that's the only thing that's keeping it there and not traveling systemically throughout the body at the level that it would if that capsule was not there.
Yes. Yeah. When you see pictures of it, it's like, oh my God, the human body did that. Like it literally what makes, they have to like slice through it. It's so solid and protective because I've seen photos and videos of where they slice right through the capsule and then like there is the ruptured. So it's an incredibly sturdy, tissue, cell, membrane, whatever you want to call it, that the body actually forms around, the implant. And because that has its own, blood flow, you could probably conceive that there would be some sort of systemic pull somewhat, but it's not like it's just leaching into your body as if that capsule wasn't there.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely
wild when you look at some of the,
right.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about breast implant illness. I'm curious, what's your other, because you are kind of so root cause focused. If you had to come up with like the second biggest, and maybe breast implants aren't the biggest, I shouldn't imply that, but I know you work with a lot of women that's relevant to. What's another kind of major toxicity that you see as far as like, this is something that so many people are dealing with that are holding them back?
It's really hard to be able to pick one, I'm sure, as you can imagine. But even when running like total toxic burden, total tox panels on clients and just knowing the exposure of how frequently these things are in our environment and our food, I think it's really a tie between mold and pesticides, specifically glyphosate. I mean, it's just insane. And the damage that both of those do to the body. I think mold is probably the one that many people just don't think that they have because they don't smell it in their house. They don't see it in their house. Maybe they live in a place like Arizona and it's a little bit more dry. They're in a new build and they think just because the building is new means that it's not going to have mold. But I think both of those, it's a tie for the pesticides and whatnot that's drifting off of people just spraying their yards, stuff that's in people's food and water that isn't fully distilled and remineralized. I mean, those are the top sources of exposure that I see.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think everybody gets kind of so caught up in like, oh, this fruit looks clean or like this house is new. And it's kind of hard to think beyond, what is kind of meeting the human eye. What happens before? What's happening behind the wall? What happened at the farm before you got the strawberries? All of that stuff can be, kind of so out of sight, out of mind for so
absolutely. I think that's the case for toxins. I will have to say though, if I'm looking at more of, I guess if you wanted to look at like mold as like a toxin / pathogen, parasites are one of the top thing that I address with every single client. If I'm looking at specific like toxins, like biotoxins, then I'll look at mold or glyphosate. Parasites, personally, and this is me, I don't rely on stool tests. I barely run them because of that, because I personally was failed by them so much in the past. Never had a positive one, was passing liver flukes and, hookworms and things like that, roundworms like crazy. So I think they can be a tool. I don't rely on them. And I will address parasites with every single client. So
yeah, a client recently was like, so stool tests can be like hit or miss. What's the best way to test? And I was like, well, the best way to test is to take anti-parasitic herbs, get yourself some rubber gloves and some sort of tool and see what you're passing. Like that's the best way to test because most people have them and they can act like these little sponges that just hold on to all the stuff that you're trying to get rid of. And they just like it's usually what when people have like reoccurring issues, like we've done a gut-based protocol and the yeast and candida comes back, but their diet is really good. Like they are the culprit for kind of like leaching this stuff back into the system.
That was me. They literally there are studies that show that they hold on to heavy metals. They will release parasites and viruses over time. They're like that Trojan horse, right? Mm-hmm. So honestly, we say if you have a pulse, you have parasites. And I always tell people you may see some in the stool, but 70% of them, aren't visible to the naked eye. So I actually have had some people go through anti-parasitic protocols and they're like, I'm so bummed. I didn't see anything. Oh my gosh, maybe this isn't working. So I always make sure to tell people you may see them, but just because you don't doesn't mean you're not passing them.
Yeah.
So
yeah, true. Because there's a difference between being a health practitioner and looking for them and being like somebody, just like a regular person who's like,
yes.
I don't see them. I always tell people like, you're not just going to look in the toilet and be like, there they are. Yeah. They're not going to be talking to you. They'll be dead, first of all.
Yes, exactly.
It's so important, but a good thing to check off the list, because then, you're not like, again, it's just another thing that you don't have to swim upstream against when you're working on other stuff. Yeah.
Spot on.
Absolutely. So where if we have people listening who want to kind of find out more, can you share things like your YouTube channel or your social media website, all of kind of the places where you show up and share your information?
Yeah. So my business is, I know most people are going to be listening to this clearly on podcasts where you have to listen. So Biohacking Bombshell is my handle for Instagram. It's also the name of my website, biohackingbombshell.com. And if you go on YouTube and you type that in, the same thing will come up. So my name is Allyssa LaScala, but what I've found is that if I tell someone Biohacking Bombshell, it's actually more likely for them to spell that right, because my first name is spelled with 2 L's and there's typically a typo. So if you just go off of the name of my business, then that'd be the best place to find me.
Yeah, I think that's smart. That's perfect. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Integrative Health Practitioner. This was such a fun and informative conversation that I think can kind of bring to light for, even people who are listening that aren't practitioners, an important topic. So I appreciate you being open and sharing your story.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay. Take care, Allyssa.
Thanks, you too.